Day 145. Early the next morning, as Zeb Fairley rode to the train station trading post to pick up the first batch of messages, Carl rode with him. Lieutenant Sanders wouldn't be in his office till 6 a.m., but Carl was going to be there waiting for him. When the two men arrived at the trading post, the attachment of military working on the post fortification detail hadn't started yet for the day. Zeb went inside to collect the messages and was greeted by the owner of the post and the only one there that early in the morning. As Carl walked around outside surveying the compound, he saw the encampment of workers across the tracks. They were just waking up and stoking the fires. He could smell the coffee brewing. He thought to himself as he looked over the heavily fortified trading post exterior, how did we get to this point? Where was this world headed? What does the future hold for our society? As he pondered these rhetorical questions, he had some idea of the answers. He believed he knew pretty well how we had gotten to this point. As for the future of society, he knew without God the outlook was bleak. He raised his head to the heavens and thanked God for his love, his blessings, and most of all, for his gift of salvation through the shedding of the blood of Jesus Christ. He smiled, at peace inside himself. As he continued to look around, he saw a jeep pull up in front of the post and three men get out. He glanced at his watch. 5:50 a.m. Punctual, he thought to himself. Carl valued punctuality. He himself had little time to wait on others, and he prided himself on always being on time. He never assumed others could afford the time to wait for him. He followed the men into the post. The clerk and owner of the post introduced him to Lieutenant Oliver Sanders. The lieutenant thanked Carl for coming and said to the clerk, "John, can I have an extra mug of coffee this morning for my guest, please?" Lieutenant Sanders was young, having graduated college just 2 months before the EMP hit. He went through ROTC in high school and enlisted right after. He excelled academically all through school, and the Army paid the tuition for his college education, which he attended at night and online. He was ambitious and career-minded. He had always planned a career with the military, and since the EMP event, he was more certain about it than ever before. He shook hands with Carl and invited him into his office, which was nothing more than a desk and a couple filing cabinets in the corner of a storeroom behind the counter. The clerk brought in a tray with a pot of coffee and 2 mugs on it. The 2 men sat sipping their coffee as the lieutenant engaged in some idle chit-chat to break the ice. Carl interrupted, explaining to the lieutenant that he was a busy man and had little time to waste on such things. Yes, of course," responded Lieutenant Sanders. "Let me get right to the point, then." The lieutenant laid out the military's plans for the post and for the region in general. He had explained that with the impending arrival of the train, things in this area were changing. He told them that the region needed a set of rules and guidelines to follow that would keep order. He explained that the current military administration was in the process of setting up a temporary board of governors to oversee policy and to try to build a structure of government. Carl didn't like the sound of this at all and grimaced as Lieutenant Sanders laid out the master plan. Carl, like Pastor Sharps and the rest of our church group, always believed the answer was less government, not more. Less control, less regulation. Still, as the lieutenant painted a detailed picture of how things were in the larger cities that were still under martial law, Carl realized that there did need to be some control. "Things are running pretty smoothly around here the way they are," Carl told Lieutenant Sanders. The lieutenant explained that, while he agreed that was true, he believed the arrival of the train could change that dynamic substantially. He had seen it in other areas, he assured Carl. As the 2 men debated what they each believed an ideal government would look like, the lieutenant summed it up by saying that he wasn't from here. He would eventually be leaving and going on to his next assignment. He urged Carl to get involved to shape the new government into what he believed it should be. It was much like the conversation Pastor had the day before with Major Stillman. Lieutenant Saunders looked out his window directly at a wall of sandbags. He said, "Carl, 30 miles to the south is a city under martial law. Every day our troops stop and turn around dozens, some days hundreds of people looking to flee that city. When the train service starts running up here, some of those people will have reason to come here, either for business, to join work parties, or whatever. Eventually, it is our hope to disimpose the martial law and let people come and go freely. Keep in mind, even though, as you say, things are running smoothly now, that will likely soon change, Carl." He turned and looked directly at Carl and said, "Carl, I need your help. I need the help of men like you. Good men. Men with morals and principle. Will you stand up and help me? Help your community? I have done my homework, Carl. I know your story. I know your background. I know about the time you spent in Afghanistan in the 90s. Carl interrupted. "That was a long time ago. That's in my past. I have a family now, a homestead to run. That's exactly why I know that you are the man I need, because you have a lot at stake here. You have a pretty big horse in this race, Carl." He slid his desk drawer open and pulled out a plastic laminated ID badge. Printed on it was one word: Constable. Lieutenant Sanders said, "The job covers the entire county. You would answer to this office directly, and to the Regional Board of Governors ultimately. The job will have a wide scope of duties and responsibilities. It will also have a wide scope of authority as well. The pay isn't much, and credits at this post, and feed and water for your horse, or fuel for a vehicle, whichever you choose to use on the job. And free passage on the train for you and your family, anywhere it runs." He managed a slight chuckle and said, "That isn't really anywhere yet, but that too will be changing as time goes on. The job is 24/7, with as little or as much time in service as needed. We are going to post a note on the board here advertising for deputies on a volunteer basis. You can draw from that list as needed." Carl took the badge and said, "I'll pick my own deputies if and when I need them." Lieutenant Sanders nodded in agreement and said, "Welcome aboard," as he shook Carl's hand. Carl slid the ID badge into his coat pocket as he turned and walked out. He rode home, alone, slowly. Zeb, finishing up his morning messenger run, returned home a couple hours later. He handed Carl a note. It was from Pastor Sharps. He invited the Fairleys to have dinner that evening with us at the church. Carl crumpled up the note and threw it in the fire. "Zeb, ask your brother to hitch up a team to the wagon. We're dining out tonight." Zeb nodded. "Yes, sir," he said as he walked out. When the Fairleys arrived at the church, we were all in the basement fellowship hall. He had the big propane stove going with a turkey roasting inside and a pot of dehydrated veggies cooking on the burner. Outside on the fire pit, there was a venison roast being barbecued. Abigail brought 3 big loaves of fresh bread and a jar of honey. Zeb brought his guitar, and we enjoyed a festive evening together with good friends. After dinner, Pastor pulled Carl aside and shared with him the meeting he had with Major Stillman. Carl shared his story of a similar meeting with Lieutenant Sanders. The two men discussed it thoroughly. Pastor had told Carl that he had discussed it with Sadie at lunch, and he was going to brief the rest of us tonight. He wanted to get Carl's opinion, but he was leaning toward taking the position on the board. Carl told Pastor that he had reservations about the whole idea of the government coming in and setting up, and we had been doing just fine on our own. But he figured it was worth going along, for now anyway, and seeing what direction it took. The two men, both cautious, discerning individuals, agreed to keep the lines of communication open between them going forward. "The new normal," Pastor said, almost to himself. Carl turned and said, "What's that, Pastor?" Pastor just managed a slight chuckle as he told Carl, "Oh, no, nothing. It's just something Major Stillman said to me. We are heading into the new normal," he said. Carl looked at Pastor, puzzled. "The new normal? What's that?" "Well," said Pastor, "I guess that's kind of up to us to decide together, Carl. At least our version of it." Carl said as the two men looked out the window together, "Maybe it'll be better than the old normal, eh, Pastor?" "Let's hope so, Carl. I don't think I can make it through another few months like the ones we just went through." Carl kind of admired Pastor. Here was this 58-year-old man who never spent one night outside camping until 4 months ago. He had struggled the past months just to survive. He felt responsible for so many people. He could tell he was tired. Weary was more accurate. They had been through so much. As Carl thought of all that lay ahead, he couldn't help wondering if the worst was behind them or in front of them. Whichever it was for certain they would face it together. Carl trusted that he can count on Pastor, and he promised himself silently right there that he would make sure Pastor could count on him. At that very moment, unknown to any of us, there were 4 men watching the church from the woods out back near the power line trail. Men who had looted and taken all they needed to survive since the EMP attack. Men who burned people out of their homes and killed anyone who resisted them in any way. They had been there since midday when they stumbled upon our camp as they walked the trail. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. God bless you.